Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Stef.
Do you notice I don't have my AirPilot headphones on today?
I did, and I also noticed you're wearing your glasses today.
Oh, yes. My contacts have just been irritating me, so I figured I'll let them breathe for a little while. So my daughter cannot stand it. She's like, Mommy, take those off. Take those off. She doesn't want any part of me wearing glasses.
That's so interesting.
Yeah,
I find that sometimes with people that wear glasses all the time, when they take them off, I find that weirder that way around than someone putting glasses on.
Yeah, I can understand that. It's like your face is naked.
Yeah, but this visual banter is a great start for an audio podcast.
We'll head over to YouTube and you'll see what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So today we're talking about something really near and dear to my recovery experience. And just as a forewarning, we're talking about a book, and one of the words in the title of this book is a swear word. The book is called The Fck It Diet by Caroline Dooner. I will heretofore refer to it as the Fck It Diet. And this is the book, I talk about this book a lot because this was my entrance into the non-diet approach before I ever read Intuitive Eating or understood what all in meant or what an all foods allowed approach was. I read this book, and this catapulted me into my recovery. So for that, I will always be grateful to Caroline Dooner. And I know that you just recently read it for the first time because I've been talking about it forever. So I'm really curious to hear what you thought. But certainly this was, ground zero for me as far as changing my life.
Mm-hmm. This book's been on my radar for a while. I see it everywhere and people talking about it. And before we decided to do this episode, I was asking myself, why haven't I read this book yet? And when I had a look at when it was published, it was 2019. So I think that was probably just not the point when I needed it. I got this message, I think, a little bit sooner, but I really liked it. I really liked the way she presented the anti-diet message. There are a couple of bits that I've highlighted that I'm not so keen on that we can touch on as well. But I think it is a really good, comprehensive introduction about being allowed to eat and trusting that your body can regulate itself. And that's a message that I think is important to get out there.
Yeah. And the other thing that doesn't necessarily speak to its content, but its delivery, was that she speaks so relatably. And to me, this marks this book from all other books in this area because she's just I feel like part of the reason why it spoke to me so much is because I resonated with her style of not that I'm sarcastic, but I really appreciate her sort of like dry humor and just the way that she says things point blank. I really connected with that. So I felt like as I was reading the book that she was there talking to me, and it just felt so relatable. And I also had her audiobook at the time. In fact, actually, before this was published, I had read it because she had it as an ebook. I think it was an ebook at first. But when, the thing started rolling out and her audiobook came out, listening to her also was very, very comforting for me. And that's what I needed so much at that time. I was so alone. I wasn't on social media yet. So I had no community. And listening to her and having her words on the page or her voice over audio tell me and reinforce in uncomplicated terms that, yes, I was allowed to eat food, that this was at the source of my binge eating. For me, that was the message I needed to hear, and that was the way I needed to hear it. And so that is a piece of why I also really like this book, because of her, just her tone and her style.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember where you first heard about her or about the book?
Yeah. I used to follow someone on Instagram who no longer is in this field. I think she switched over to like real estate. Her name was Bree. And I used to follow her, and she had mentioned it as the ebook and said, go and download it from her site. And it sounded interesting. The title's pretty interesting. So I that's the way that I saw it. It was online. It was the downloadable version of the ebook. And that was it. That was the first time that I'd ever heard this message delivered this way. That was how I'd forgotten about Brie.
That's interesting because the title actually put me off. I think reading it for a while, it felt a little bit like trying to shock by using the F word. It's like the other books that are out there that use the F word in the title. I have a little inner eye roll about it. But
Yeah.
she did win me over when I read her, and I really enjoyed the way she wrote. She did win me over. There was one quote that I think kind of sums up how she talks about dieting and how we might think about dieting as well. And she writes, no matter how much support and willpower you have, even if you stick to your diet, there is a biological and metabolic backlash. We believe diets must work because we initially lose weight and initially improve health. So when things go south and blow up in our faces, we assume it's our own fault. We don't understand the long-term effects of diet, the weight regain, how bad it is for our health and metabolism, and the fact that we get into a miserable cycle of self-blame. Really, it's our body's weight regulation system that is actually running the show all along.
She divides the book into 3 parts, right? Of physical, mental, emotional. And that part I believe is in the physical section, which is my favorite part of the book and probably the most compelling, and was the most compelling for me, because it articulates really nicely, I think, in very easy to understand terms, that role, like the role of the biology and physiology as opposed to willpower. To me, that was the most convincing thing of this understanding of what my body was doing from a survival standpoint, which I suppose we'd heard this before. I don't know. I mean, I think my mom used to say that stuff to me. Like she used to say, like, if you don't eat enough, your body, and I would be like, whatever, mom, you're just trying to get me to not have an eating disorder anymore. I mean, this is going back. But the way it was spelled out in this book, and especially the section on the Minnesota starvation experiment, the way it was described and the level of detail it went into without being overwhelming and overly scientific, what happened was I think it just perfectly explains. It's like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is that why I always feel like I'm completely hijacked? Like to me, it was like puzzle pieces that was like, oh yeah, that actually feels true. Like that feels like what I'm dealing with here. And I think that that's part of the impact of, passages like that and that entire section really. Within that section too, I think that's where I have the most yellow highlighting. For anyone not familiar with the Minnesota starvation experiment, this was an experiment that was done during World War II with conscientious objectors to the war who were otherwise healthy of, body and mind, and who underwent a period of starvation, which was actually only 1,600 calories. That was considered starvation, which is really more than many diets prescribe. And they were exercising as well. This was how much their calories were slashed, and it showed the effect of what happened. And one of the most, interesting things I have, upping their calories above what they ate before the experiment had an immediate positive effect as far as the rehabilitation process. And that's important information for us because it means that hormonally and chemically, it can be a very bumpy road while you refeed yourself after famine and dieting. They often talked about a hunger sensation they couldn't satisfy no matter how much they ate or how full they were. And that to me was like the first time I saw, okay, so in the process of refeeding, of eating again and not restricting, they had to eat more than they originally ate in order to stop feeling that, bottomless pit syndrome. And that was what I was experiencing. But to see that other people had, gone through restriction, and then in order to restore, they had to eat above and beyond where they had ever been, was riveting to me and spoke to my experience. And that's why I've had this like underlined and highlighted all through here.
I've had the Minnesota starvation experiment summarized probably about 7 or 8 times by different people. And one of the things that really annoys me is it can be misreported in some ways. I don't know if you've ever heard anyone else talking about it, but one of the things that happened in the experiment was one guy cut off his thumb.
Yeah.
So there's all this talk around, oh, he went crazy without food and he cut off his thumb. But actually, when you go back to the original reports, it was an accident. It's not to saying he might have been a bit lightheaded from lack of food.
But it wasn't like an act of
food
or take my thumb.
Exactly. So I was really pleased when I read her summary, because I thought from all the different ways I've heard it summarized, I felt like hers was pretty good. It wasn't hyperbolic, and it just presented it in a clear and accurate way, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah. That was a turning point for me. That part of the book, I think I read several times.
One of the criticisms that I've heard levied against her is this whole, it's okay for her to be anti-diet because she's thin. And so I really liked that she spoke to that and she owned her thin privilege. And I really liked this particular quote from page 42. And Dooner writes, sorry, can I just say as an aside, every time I say Dooner, I always want to go, Dooner, and I don't know why. So I just hear it like echoing in my head and I have to
Dooner. Is that
Dooner.
okay.
It's like a football chant or something like that.
Go ahead. You can do it.
So Dooner writes, so if there's any part of you that's looking at me and hoping you'll end up where I ended up, or looking at anyone else and hoping to end up where they ended up, that's a habit I want you to become aware of. It's a very human habit. We all do it, but it's not helping. Trying to be someone else is what got us into this mess in the first place. I really liked that.
Yeah, that's so funny because I have that, all the next 2 paragraphs circled, which I'm going to read because I love this part. This is, I think, speaking to the fact that we think our best self is our thinnest self. And she's saying your best self is probably the one who trusts yourself the most, is able to relax and be social when you feel like it, and is able to seek quiet time when you need it. Someone who is able to be spontaneous when it suits you and willing to take up space, speak up, take risks, use your creativity, is willing for things to be messy and imperfect, and is an all-around happier human. Some people are hesitant to go on the Fck It Diet because they don't know if they actually like who they really are. They're not sure if who they really are is that special or interesting or attractive enough. I get it. That's a scary thing to think. Thanks to lots of insidious messages from the media, it can be hard to trust that you're actually okay as you are and that you don't need to change or appease anyone. And I just remember reading that and thinking, I don't know, the whole like authenticity message of, I think that's where I probably first connected the dots of being your authentic self and not dieting anymore. But to that end, I don't think at the time I even knew what thin privilege was or why she would, how these things even went together. And so I didn't notice it at the time, but I appreciate that, I didn't even remember that she really addressed it in the book now. Yeah.
Because when I looked at the initial structure of the book and I saw how much was on the physical part, and then there seems to be this tiny chapter on emotions and the mental side of it, I was expecting it to feel unbalanced. And I didn't find that to be the case, but just following on from that bit that you read, this is one of the last things she says towards the end of the book, which spoke to me, so I highlighted it. She said, because even though this whole thing feels like it's all about the food, the actual underlying issue is how hard we are on ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we can leave the episode there. I think we're done. If you just take that bit away, that would make me very happy.
Yeah. Well, she talks about shoulding all over yourself. And, all the ways in which I think at one point later in the book, in the emotional part, or maybe it's the mental part, I can't remember where, but she says, make a list of all the shoulds, food wise and otherwise, like all the ways that you're saying that you should be this, you should be that, you should be doing this, you should have this, you should, in your life. And those concepts, I think the way that this process speaks to us as individuals and our relationship with self is weaved really through this book.
She packs a lot into the chapters about emotions as well. I was surprised at how much she managed to fit in the amount of space that she was writing it. When she talks about emotions, well, she has these 5 tools, doesn't she? Do you remember the 5 tools?
The lie down.
Yes.
The brain dump.
Yes.
Breathing.
Yeah, breathe and feel. Yes.
Breathe and feel.
Yep.
I don't remember the other 2 now.
Well, the first one is allow food. Come on, Steph. How did you miss
come
that
on.
one?
I mean, it's such a given.
I know. It seems strange to call that a tool, but I get it. Like allow food. And then the last one is the belief release. So it's about your limiting beliefs and trying to release them. When she talks about the emotions, one bit I really liked is she says, our attempts to heal physical and emotional wounds simply by thinking about them won't do anything. You have to be in the body to heal the body. You have to come back down. And she talks about this coming back down. That's how she talks about feelings. And this really made me think about therapy, actually. Sometimes people go in therapy and they can talk about this stuff over and over again. And unless you bring the emotions into therapy and you feel them in that space as well with your, therapist, you're not really going to be able to work on the emotions themselves. It just feels like this intellectual activity. And I have tried many times to simply intellectualize my emotions, and I'll let you know if I get there.
We love connecting with our listeners, so we host regular community events on Zoom. We also have a private Facebook group for our Patreon supporters. Please visit our website, lifeafterdietspodcast.com, to find out more.
For more details about how to contact us or to work with Sarah or Stef individually, please check out the show notes. Now let's get back to the episode.
Well, interestingly, so I think that I was curious to hear what you thought of the emotional section, because I enjoyed the emotional section, but I didn't necessarily feel like it was accessible to me. And I do now. Like now, this is where I'm working. Like this is all those dots are connecting so much this year. But at the time, I just understood it to be like lofty goals, but not things that I necessarily understood, which I think is interesting. And it probably speaks to where my binge eating particularly was rooted, because the physical section is probably, maybe the mental too, is what I needed for me to be able to. But I just wrote in my Wednesday weekly emails about how this journey, it's still going on. And I think this book is a pretty good illustration of how that works. Like just because the binge eating has stopped and the body image is generally neutralized, that emotional piece is something that is still evolving and paying dividends. So I think that's hopeful, because it's not like you have to get all of these things down necessarily to make it work, or that doesn't have to be the case, and that they have time to continue to evolve at your own pace.
Yeah, but I think for me, because there was so much emotional eating, I mean, the restriction was there, mental restriction for sure, that I don't think I could have let go of the mental restriction without doing the emotional work alongside it. Because I don't think that my body, in fact, I know my body didn't need to be physically refed. It was definitely more this psychological, this constant anticipation of what I was going to do or not going to do that was so problematic. Just tell me what you think about this quote. Dooner writes, "Do yourself a favor and let yourself finally feel them." This is your feelings. "The paradox, of course, is that once you do the scary work of feeling what's in there, it becomes easier. It doesn't feel so hard or overwhelming anymore. People who actually feel emotions are the ones who are able to live their lives whole and present in their bodies, unafraid of being human."
Yes. Okay. My thoughts on that are, sure, in retrospect, yes, that makes sense. But before you can access that, I feel like, and we've talked about this in a different episode, it's like, well, I'll do it, but how? Kind of like I want to do that, but I don't know how to access that.
Mhm. May I have permission to be a pedant?
Yes.
She says, "The paradox is that once you do the scary work of feeling what's in there, it becomes easier." That's not a paradox. Once you start doing something, it does become easier. And the other thing, just while we're talking about grammar, is she often says, she does it about 7 times. Instead of saying try to figure it out, she'll say try and figure it out. Try and stop restricting, not
Really?
try to stop restricting. And I know that when I speak, I sometimes say it wrong. And whenever I listen to myself editing this podcast and I say it the wrong way, I say try and instead of try to. Oh,
As an English major myself, I didn't pick up on that, and I'm upset about it, but I didn't. Caroline,
I found it jarring. About 7 times she does it. I'm like, who is copy editing?
Who's editing?
Yes.
Maybe she meant try and.
Well, I thought that too, but I'm going to send you the 7 examples after this, and it's not the case, because occasionally that can be correct, but it wasn't. You're not trying and doing something. What she's talking about is trying to do something.
All right. Well, I mean, let's forgive her that.
I think I might have just gone down in some people's estimations. I can't help myself.
No, but actually, the tool that I liked the most in her emotional eating, in the emotional part, was I don't know. There's top two. I really like the brain dump, and I really like the lie down. The brain dump is basically that stream of consciousness, just get everything out on paper. It's sort of like, and I think she says it's inspired by Morning Pages, by Julia Cameron, but she says do it anytime. It's just sort of getting it out there, and just, this isn't something you're going to capture in a journal that you're going to pass down to grandkids or anything like that. But this is for you, and it's just about getting it out, dumping it. Again, I like the language she uses because it makes it feel like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm gonna do is dump my brain out onto this page. So that was helpful for me. But the lie down also, this 10 minutes of laying down and just essentially, I think the idea is just to feel and let those things be. But for me, it was like this, again, permission to stop, to slow down, to just lay down and just have to do nothing. Um, again, not new information, not the first time I ever heard of these kinds of concepts, but maybe it's just her delivery, which made me feel like that's accessible to me. I can do that. I can try that.
Mhm. Well, when I looked at the tools, I felt like I was a really good student because I was like, allow foods, check. Lie down, I do that. I absolutely do that sometimes when I really notice I'm feeling something. I just go and I lie down with it. The breathe and feel, maybe not quite in the way she talks about it. The brain dump, yes, I do morning pages, but again, not necessarily in the morning. And the belief release, yes, I think I have my own ways of doing that. So I feel like all the advice she's giving is pretty sound. And on the beliefs front, there's probably one of my favorite quotes of the book where she writes, so I'm already laughing to myself. It's like I'm still at school or something. But she says, when beliefs lurk in dark corners of our subconscious, we don't even realize they are controlling us. So shine a light on them. Having awareness about what's ruling you is key. Look them square in the eye. Say, I see you, you little fucker. And then I think the next page is about finding the little fuckers.
Yeah, I saw that.
I did enjoy that because I didn't see it coming.
Yeah. I have all these highlighted bits about carbs and the demonization of carbs and sugar. I have exclamation marks here, which is interesting because as I'm rereading this now, I was thinking, well, yeah, Steph, you know this, but it's like at the time I just didn't. It's like, what? Carbs and sugar aren't bad for me? Like this idea. But one of the things I did highlight was she says, I'm not saying that eating candy and only candy for the rest of your life is a good idea. You know that. But what we are told about sugar and carbs is destructive to our relationship to food and feeding ourselves. We need way more than just sugar, but we need carbs and sugar too. And the less you eat them, the more likely it is that you'll crave them, and the harder your body will work to break down protein and muscle into sugar for your brain to use to keep you alive. She has in italics, which I just, it's like, yeah, all right.
She loves her italics.
She does. I think it makes it.
Yeah. Well, when I was writing my book, my copy editor told me off for my italics. I had to take most of them out.
Oh.
And now I'm like, I should have trusted myself and left them in.
See? Self-trust.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, she's got a whole section on in defense of shitty food, and that whole, so she does, one of the things about her I related to so much is she has the history of orthorexia, and she describes, binging on almond flour cup or muffins or something. And that was her point of, okay, something's got to change. I think when she talks about that on her birthday, I believe, but she spends a decent amount of time talking about, the healthism, and which I was very heavily invested in. So I appreciated that, the attention she gave to that part, and nutrition not being so black and white.
I thought that, and I thought about you, and it made me think, actually, if I'd read this book back when, I'm wondering whether she might have lost me there, because when I was struggling, like really struggling with binge eating, and I would listen to these other people saying they were struggling with binge eating, but also things like orthorexia and also plenty of actual restriction, I can remember thinking, well, like, it's all right for you. At least you can restrict some of the time. And I remember feeling other because of that.
I can understand if that had been my only story, I could have understood that would make me feel that way as well. But to me, I feel like I ran the whole gamut of binging in every way it could exist. Well, probably not, but it felt like it. And this hit all the parts. It addressed all the parts for me.
So there was a couple of bits that I highlighted that made me go,
okay, yeah, I want to hear about that.
And you can tell me why you think I might have had that reaction. I'll let you guess.
Okay.
So she's talking about a student of hers who went on the Fck It Diet and is coming out singing their praises about how amazing it was to follow her advice. And so this student, Mary, says, I just don't think about it. This is food she's talking about. I forget a lot. and I feed myself by second nature. It's just not a big deal. Eating and meals happen, and I barely think twice about it. This is a huge change in my body's and brain's relationship to food.
Mm. That's pretty wrapped up in a bow. Like it's a perfect ending. You mean just like the realism of that?
The sentence that got me is eating and meals happen. Like, no, they don't. Not for me. They don't happen. Like, I live on my own. I have to plan my meals. I have to think about it. They do not happen.
She healed and suddenly these meals presented them. They're just waiting for her on the table.
Yeah. Or I'm imagining she's got someone at home that's cooking her meals for her. And part of me's going, oh, it's all right for you. You
Well,
never have to think about it.
I think I'm just interpreting that sentence more like I think I know what she means by that. They aren't a big deal. That it's easier.
Yeah. And I agree that it's easier. And I know a lot of people will say, particularly like the students she presents, and Dooner says it herself, like, this for me, it's completely gone. It's a complete non-issue for me. I don't think I could sit here and say that food is a non-issue for me. I feel like it's something I have to be vigilant about. I have peace with it now, but that's not the same as not having to think about it. I have to pay attention what's going on with being food, because I feel like it's there. Like I could go back to it at any point. And I think it's the difference between how people sometimes talk about it is in, I see this as something that I will be managing for, I don't know how long, the rest of my life, not the rest of my life, I don't know. And other people will talk about it like, no, you can heal your relationship with food and everything can be.
Yeah. I think there are two camps. No, I think there's more than two camps because I feel like I'm not in either of those camps. I feel like I don't feel like I'll binge again because uh because I think there's a distinction between binging and emotional eating. And I think that emotional eating I do. But I don't binge anymore and I don't think I would unless it was restricting. Maybe, I don't know, maybe there's some world in which I would, but I feel like I don't feel like food is the easiest, breeziest thing I ever do. Like, it's not like it never happened and I don't have any sort of thoughts and feelings about it, but I also don't feel at risk. But when I'm very, very stressed or when I'm very, very anxious, um, I have more tendency to emotionally eat and I have to monitor my nervous system then. And that's an active thing. But I'm not confused anymore, I think. I think the difference is that before when I was binging, especially in my earlier years, before physical restriction was really at play, um, I had no idea what was going on or what I was doing wrong. And now I feel like I completely understand how mental restriction played a role and how emotional suppression played a role. And because I see that, I can't unsee that. And I don't feel like I'd ever be binging again because I know too much about what's going on there. It's no longer this hazy mystery. And that alone is so powerful to me as far as not binging, because it's like, well, there's no self-blame anymore. It's not like I hate myself, I need to get back on track. Now it's like, well, I can't blame myself here. This is a biological and mental and emotional thing going on. It makes sense to me. So no, it would no longer have the same control over me.
Yeah. So the way I see it is I don't experience strong urges to binge anymore. And I feel that if I did, I would know how to respond and look after myself to get those urges to reduce. But because something that I used to do with food a lot was this complete numbing out, if life ever, how can I put this without this sounding maybe extreme or like quite morose, if my life were to completely fall apart,
Yeah.
and I just kind of felt like saying F it to everything, I can't say now with all certainty that I wouldn't go back into the food and just be like, I'm just going to live in a numbed out haze. And so there's part of me that feels, again, like I hate making comparisons to alcohol or other addictions because I don't think the term addiction is helpful and it's not how I see it. But it's almost like the alcoholic that's like, they almost have to be vigilant about ever going back there. And I feel like there's something about that. I feel like there's part of me that, I don't know, if I wanted to hit that self-destruct button, like that there's part of me that's capable of doing that if it was activated. Does that make sense?
Yes, because I have that same self-destruct button, or I did, but I don't know. I understand what you're saying, but I feel like there's something now present that I can't turn off that would not allow that to happen. But maybe it would turn off. But I just feel like no, because it doesn't feel like something I turn on or off. It feels something I see or don't see. It just feels like I couldn't self-destruct anymore. I'd be onto myself too much. I think before I used to really do it and I would numb out, but I feel like I don't have the capability of numbing out anymore, like to that degree,
Yeah.
because I would know what I was doing and I'd be like, "Ugh, this isn't even working." Like I also feel like if I were to numb out, I would do it in a totally different way now.
What would that be?
Well, because I have that thought sometimes of like if life got so bad, you know what I mean? Like if everything fell apart, I sometimes think about that, you know? It just, I don't know why we do that. Maybe all humans do that. But I'm like, if everything just fell apart, I would, and I would just always imagine that like I'd be like, I would get on a plane and I would fly. I always imagine like I have the secret life on like the secret island and no one finds me. And that's what I would do if I hated myself that much. Like I would go escape like that.
I've got a really good friend of mine, used to be a heroin addict. And she always says, I think, if I get in my 80s and I'm old and I'm on the way out, she said, I'm just going to do a boot of heroin and go out that way. And I'm like, can you just check in with me? Because I might be ready to come with you. I don't know. We'll have to see.
I got to breathe and feel.
So I've got one more quote that made me go, and that is, you are not a bottomless pit. And you're also not the one person this won't work for. It doesn't matter if you've been a food addict your entire life. The reason you are is because of restriction, and the cure is complete removal of restriction.
Yeah. Okay. So there's definitely an anti-diet camp. And I think Caroline Dooner is one of these advocates who's like, no, binging is rooted in restriction, period. There is nothing else. Like that is it. And I think it's further distinguished by saying that binge eating is rooted in restriction, emotional eating is something different, which I do believe that those are different. But in my experience through coaching so many people, I believe that there are caveats to that, which I didn't always think. Especially with people with trauma, I've noted there is a protective layer that food serves. That numbing out is very safe, and it is the only thing one can do to survive. And in those situations, I have seen where the restriction's not that force that's pushing it. And so my views on that have changed. I don't know if hers have. I know she wrote this a long time ago, but I know that is a place where there's differentiation in the beliefs in this sphere.
Yeah. My issue is just with anyone who says, you've got this
Anything.
problem, this is how to fix it, and it will definitely work. I know my solution will work for you, because we don't know.
Yeah, it's absolute.
And I agree, it's probably true the majority of the time. And it's always going to feature as well, because most people that are struggling with binge eating or some kind of overeating are going to, at some point, try and make attempts to control that through some form of restriction. And trying to figure out where one ends and the next begins is just, that's the challenge, right?
I'm with you. I'm one of those people who, whenever I'm asked to rate something on a scale of 1 to 10, I never rate a 1 and I never rate a 10. Ever.
So even like a review, what if it was out of 5? Would you do a 5 out of 5?
I don't know. I guess I have before. But I generally don't, like when I'm rating something like a course I've done or a product or anything like that, I won't, because I'm always like, there's always something that makes it not completely 100% anything, bad or good. Yeah. And I feel like I've rated, like, I've probably really hurt some professors and clinician reviews and things like that.
But
meanwhile, 5 stars. Nice ladies worth a listen, 5 stars.
yeah. So don't take this on account with this podcast. We need 5-star reviews. That's a wonderful opportunity to, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider leaving us a rating or a review. Thanks. One point that she makes that I think is just so important. I have heard it before. I really enjoyed being reminded of it again, and I want to remind everybody out here as well. And that is, according to Dooner, when you're thin, undereating and overexercising are seen as disordered and dangerous. But fat people who are doing the exact same thing are seen as doing just what is responsible and necessary. Many fat people actually have anorexia, putting their bodies through extreme restriction as they are encouraged to do, but they still don't look like it because their weight set range is high. A weight requirement for diagnosing anorexia is becoming old school thinking. Behaviors define eating disorders, not body size. Both thin and fat people will experience the same hormonal starvation mode. The only difference is the external weight set point. Mic drop.
Yes, I'm glad you said that. This book addresses that in multiple ways. It also talks about, well, what if I'm a binger? You know, it specifically asks that. And she does address this whole implicit idea that if you're restricting, you must be thin. And that this doesn't exist outside of that.
And then there's just one last one that I want to finish on, actually, because I think it's a really nice one to end this episode on. Because for me, it really encompasses the compassion element, this relationship we have with our bodies. So I will read this before we end.
Okay.
Your body exists to heal you. Your body's signals, cravings, and appetite exist to keep you alive and to take care of you. Your exhaustion, hunger, stress response, and immune response all exist to keep you well. Every single thing your body has ever done has been to protect you. Our mistake has been believing that there is something wrong with having an appetite or having a body that isn't extremely small. In order to trust, you have to take a leap of faith. Ask yourself what you really believe to be true in your bones, and then act on it. Start listening to your appetite. Start following your cravings. Learn to trust by listening to your body's signals. Your body will not let you down.